So with 30 years of experience under his belt, Doug Wills is the editor emeritus at ESI Media, which includes the Evening Standard and the independent newspapers, where he spent 16 years as managing editor. His role involved working closely with all editorial executives and dealing daily with circulation, advertising, and production directors, coordinating the complex operation of producing daily newspapers and their editorial digital channels. That's a big role. And today we are honored to have Doug Wills with us. So without me kind of going on any further, Doug, if it's okay, could you run through, I guess, your experience in the industry, broadly about challenges, whether things over that time have changed significantly, and if they have, I guess, how do people break into this industry, which is fiercely changing, isn't it, nowadays? I'll let you crack on. Thank you.
Okay, well, no, thank you very much, both of you. They're very nice, and I now have to live up to what you've said. I would try. I've been in the industry for an awful long time, and that's from effectively from when I was at school, because many years ago, when I began in the industry, I was very lucky in that I wanted to be a journalist because I had been told I wouldn't be a professional footballer, because I really wanted to be a professional footballer, and I thought I would be, because we're all very confident when we're young players. So I then decided I wanted to be a sports journalist, because somebody said that might at least be a way of getting involved in sport. And I was lucky enough to get on an apprenticeship, editorial apprenticeship. And that's when I found I loved journalism, because until then, and until one enters journalism, one has a picture of it in one's own mind, maybe based upon films, maybe based upon books. But until you're actually involved, you don't know what you'll be doing. And I hear this from everybody. And those of us who happened to fall on our feet and got into the profession and then found we enjoyed it, then don't stop enjoying it. It's a wonderful experience, and challenging, always challenging, but a wonderful experience. So that's how I came about getting involved, and we'll come back to different elements of it. And I went through reporting as a trainee reporter, trainee writer, and then went into political reporting in the regions. That was in Reading, Berkshire, and then in Bristol in the West Country for evening paper, morning paper. And then I tried to take this further into London, and was writing for the Observer, and tried to get into the Times, and was very close each time. And then after a couple of years, I hadn't got my dream job of being Home Affairs editor, so I changed direction and then went into, if you like, editing of different areas, and so forth, and going through. But that's a bit of a picture. But the most important lesson in that is that everything changes. And it changes sometimes by the month, definitely by the year. And if you live long enough for a decade, it will change from how you thought it would go to how it ends up. And that's over many times that we'll do this. So currently, let's take where we are now. And where we are currently is in a particular moment of accelerated change, and this is because of COVID, and is accelerated the changes in the industry, the media, and indeed the world at large. But particularly in our subject that we're talking about today, it has accelerated the change towards dynamic news, fast digital options, multi-platform. and it is put an extra speed on what is probably, and still only probably, inevitable move to digital. But that's not a definite. Whatever happens, there will still be many people believe that print will continue for many decades, but it's the actual speed of change has been accelerated. Now, the industry itself is a multi-platform, as I say, and Mustakin going to do broadcast journalism is definitely one of the expanding programs, but it's platforms, I should say, as well as programs. But that doesn't mean it's the only one in town. There are many shows in town and many ways of getting into it. But I think the route that the Aziz Foundation has adopted and is very well placed to do is to give groundwork, and groundwork is everything. It is the very, very few, but still some trainees do enter straight from school, but very few, but some do, because we've actually got rolled back the clock in some of that, because there's found to be a need for a diverse group on coming in at different ages and different social backgrounds. But the groundwork of going to a media course undoubtedly helps. Now, that's a quick run through. Mustakin, would you like to sort of take up any particular parts of that or something totally different? If you'd like to ask me in any particular direction.
Yes, thank you for that, Doug. Before I do crack on with some of the questions that we have kind of sent in before today's talk, I would just like to touch on that last point you made about experience versus going in and having a qualification, because nowadays in particular we see schemes such as internships and other kind of, dare I say, more kind of hands-on schemes. You say that kind of getting a media qualification and undoubtedly getting trained the old-fashioned way, dare I say, is good. Why is that? And is there a better option, do you think?
The one thing we've all learned, all of us in the industry, is there is no one straightforward way of getting in, and different ways work for different people. The one common denominator through all the different entryways is to gain experience, and for the start of that can't be too young an age. If while still at school, one is writing a diary, a school trip diary, or an idea of thoughts or views on politics. It can be local, national, international. But if you're writing and writing something that a wider group of people will look at, then that's even better. Now, obviously, there are some formal type of routes through, whether it's school magazine, university magazine, or a particular even fanzine. It can be anything. But if it's collated and read, then that's even better. But it doesn't have to be. And so the different routes then can be that some individuals might be spotted at that stage, and they may be spotted, or they may just approach editors and editors or magazine publishers or online webinars with their ideas, or they may be spotted. But certainly if somebody doesn't come forward when they are applying for a position without having tried to make their mark, then they probably won't be as seriously considered as others who have demonstrated it. And also, lastly, on this subject, by making your mark, you're finding out whether you enjoy it. And it may well be that some people have this mind's eye of, yeah, I'd like to be a writer, I'd like to be a broadcaster, I'd like to be a filmmaker. But until they actually try it, they won't know in themselves whether they actually enjoy it and find it challenging and find it rewarding, because it needs to be all those things if you're going to make a career of it.
Brilliant, thank you, Doug. One of the topics that was sent in prior to today's talk as an important one that people want to hear about is long-term career planning. So as we've just mentioned, experience is invaluable in this industry, but at what cost? So obviously during our lifetimes, we experience other responsibilities, be that parenting or increased responsibilities in any way in our lives. So how do we balance those responsibilities and push forward in our careers, particularly early on when we're not entirely sure journalism or a specific route in journalism is the way that we want?
This has been a question that has come to the fore more in recent years than perhaps previous years. And some would say, probably wrongly, that the life-work balance is only a question when those two aren't merged together. For many people, the journalism path is their life. Now, that doesn't mean it's exclusive of everything else, but it does involve everything else. And if one is a writer on a broadcast and it's working on to a TV base, it might be working late into the evening, late into the night. If one's on a national newspaper, and particularly on a newspaper, for a national newspaper, it will undoubtedly be working afternoons, evenings, and into the night, and possibly some days all night. Digital, as we know, it doesn't stop. So it's 24/7. So if there is one wants an absolute barrier and a definite life-work division, and to know that you've got a 9-to-5 job, then there are elements in the media that will provide that. There will be some employers who will be shaped that way. But that's where the individual has to decide what type of work they want, and whether they want a 9-to-5 job or a broad media job. Travel comes into this as well, of course. And if certain roles, it requires travel. So all these things come through. Now, whether an individual makes a calculated decision on this, that's possible. But as I said, really, everything changes. It can be that one sets out with an aim, and then within a few months the aim changes and the goals change and the wishes change. So I think, yes, to have guidelines, but unless you're flexible, I think you may have to make some hard choices when decisions come up. But that doesn't mean to say that people shouldn't. Just a couple of asides in experience. There was an editor of the Evening Standard who, Veronica Wadley, and she had been at the Telegraph, had been at the Daily Mail, and had been the editor of the Evening Standard. And she's, this may be a good thing or a bad thing, is credited with making Boris Johnson what he is today, as in Prime Minister and Mayor of London, because she was influential when he was a journalist, and when he stood as mayor, she didn't think he was taking it seriously, the candidacy. And she said to him, look, if you want this job hard enough, you have to earn it. and she gave him a dressing down, basically, and he sat up, took notice, and focused on that. Similar happens with other journalists, and it may not be that they go down the political route, but different things. Veronica had 3 children, and this has changed, the world has changed. It's not that long ago, but the world, I think, has changed since then. And for one of the children, she took 3 weeks off work. Another, she took 2 weeks off. And that's not a recommended way of doing it. And when she was at the Evening Standard, she used to come into the office, she'd get up at 4:30 in the morning, do a fitness regime that she had, then read the papers, get in at 6 o'clock, and then the conference would take place at 8. But before the conference, she would talk to her teenage children and talk at length to them about the sort of day they were going to have their school lessons. Now that's somebody who is focused. I'm not saying people should do this, but there will be people who actually become focused in their work. So work-life balance is all down to the individual.
And one of the things that I kind of got from what you just said was the invaluable value of experience. It's huge, isn't it? And it's something that you build on an individual basis. So aside from experience, which itself is huge, what else can a young journalist do to stand out from the crowd? Because, you know, particularly when it comes to freelancing, it's a fiercely competitive market, not just in print, not just in broadcast, but just overall, it's fiercely competitive.
Yes, it is. And I think one is creativity, and it's giving some, whether it's in artistic creativity or digital creativity or in the words, and the latter of those, the words, that's the hardest thing. And some people are naturally gifted and they will have a command of words. Now, that's the opportunity to be a writer has to be worked at, and it doesn't often come easily, because a reporter is not necessarily a writer, and a broadcaster can be a facilitator rather than a creator of journalism. And it's a case of being in the right place at the right time, always saying yes if somebody asks you whether you can do something, and if somebody gives you an opportunity, you seize it and shine at it. And sorry, I've lost power a moment. You seize the opportunity and you shine at it if you can. There will be opportunities, and I don't know whether any of you has heard, but recently the new person on the Today program, he said he actually had a lot of broadcast experience, but the night before he was on, he was petrified, and his problem was he was actually given warning. Many people just get thrown into the deep end in broadcasting, and if they get thrown into the deep end, it's those who are already in a level of confidence, already in a level of knowledge, that will actually shine. So it is taking that advantage of that situation. But the point that you were saying about experience, I cannot exaggerate how important that is. And you mentioned internships. Yes, internships are good. There is a mood in the industry that all internships should be paid, and that because otherwise employers can take advantage of keen young, normally people, and 2 weeks can turn to a month and can turn to longer. And many employers now are not doing that. They actually are paying for internships. And if it is, I would say a couple of weeks, great. Longer than that, and it should be paid. Internships are terrific because they give you experience and they also give you a taste of whether it is something you want to do.
Fantastic. You touched on my next question there, which was about finances, which is another thing that came up as a potential topic for today. So you mentioned 2 weeks being the kind of, if it's longer than 2 weeks, it's worth getting paid for it. What's realistic as an asking price? I know it depends on various roles and it depends on the situation, but is it realistic to ask for money? And should young journalists be afraid of asking? Obviously, it's a fantastic opportunity if they are offered work. Where's the balance there?
It's a very good question. It's a difficult one to answer because it depends slightly on the opportunity and definitely on the duration. But they shouldn't be afraid to ask for money. Absolutely, you shouldn't. How much money? The London living wage is always a good marker, and that's broadly £20,000 a year based upon a 40-hour week. Then you can scale it down from that, and it can be scaled down to hours almost if it's hours. It's a good marker. I think in terms of salaries, again, sadly for the individuals, the starting salaries as a trainee or an apprentice or as somebody who's coming in and getting and doing their training as part of their joining, it will probably be in the order of up to £25,000 per annum. And if it can rise reasonably quickly, salaries, and if it was 30,000, that would be pretty good on a level of gaining experience. And there's not a great salary. That's not a great salary, particularly in London. And the industry is finding it difficulty, as many industries are in COVID, and there's been recession in the industry. But even before that, it's always been hard to earn monies early on, the level of salary is, there will be guideline figures, but invariably they are individually negotiated. If somebody is particularly if somebody's in a smaller company, it will be a negotiating, and negotiating is how good one is, how good one is at negotiating, how generous the employer is, which often isn't very generous. And it's difficult to actually give a guideline figure, and it does depend upon the employer. So it's probably not great for the help, but the best way of knowing the salaries is to talk to the others in the company that you're going to work with. And people often, they may be a little bit guarded about it, but most people will talk of their salaries or salary guidelines. And the companies should absolutely give salary guidelines.
Brilliant, thank you, Doug. I think we've got a hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to
Farah,
with that. Yeah,
Farah, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, please. Hi, Doug. Thanks so much for making time. I'm a new graduate from City, and my question is actually, I'm just curious about your view on, as we move and restrictions are starting to ease, and the work from home policy is probably going to change from the government. So I'm just wondering, what's your view as an editor about staff continuing to work from home or having a hybrid working pattern?
Another very good subject, and one that is changing by the day. Personally, I found working from home difficult because while the technology's there, you lose on the dynamics of working with people. And I think in the media, it is you need a dynamic. Now, it can be achieved through Zoom, but not easily, but it can. And we shouldn't forget that many journalists have always worked remotely, particularly if it's an international operation or a national operation, because headquarters can be in London or Birmingham, and the staff are around the country, around the world. So it's not that new, but to have a news desk or a features desk or a creative desk all separate it does, I think, miss something. The broadcast element, similarly, it misses something. And there's a creativity that you do get from people working together. And now the view has been with the publishers that they absolutely have followed the government guidelines. And in the Evening Standard and the Independent, on 2 floors, there are normally some 200. Well, on the 1 floor, actually, of the editorial, there's normally about 200 journalists. And on that 1 floor, I would say since March of last year, the largest working number at any one time has probably been about 25, 30. And for many months, it was 10. Now, the Evening Standard has continued to print about 500,000 copies. The digital side of the company, it's made a decision to go digital first, and that means it's far more integrated. But it still doesn't detract from the print side, but it has pushed the digital side, and that's operated remotely with hardly anybody as a central figure even in the operation. So it can work. The Independent went digital some 5 years ago, and that operation has almost entirely been remote. And today there were possibly maximum of 10 people in where there would normally be 100, but that was just because they've tried to, on a couple of days a week, get people in to have some conversations and to have a physical dynamic. But so it can work. Now, what's going to happen in, let's say, 3 months' time, that most people have had double jab and we're vaccinated, and that the illness side of COVID is depleted. Is it going to go back to as it was? No, it won't, for a whole bunch of reasons. And the life-work balance comes into that. Many people have found they get a better life-work balance by not having to spend 2 hours commuting. And they find that they can be just as productive remotely. Employers would find they won't need so much office space, and perhaps they won't need to pay as much to cover transport costs. So things will change for a whole bundle of reasons, and that's just media. The same applies in finance, legal, and many all administratively based roles. So it has changed. And this is what I was saying earlier about acceleration. And maybe it was always going to happen like that, but the COVID has accelerated the change. So it's many places, many companies and editors in broadcasters say it will not be as it is today. It will be more cohesive groups working together, but it won't be as it was.
Thank you.
Thank you, Farah. And if anyone else does have questions, please feel free to raise your hand, send in on the chat. But just moving on, this is a kind of big chunk of a few points that people have raised prior to today. and that's working with editors, I'll call it. So I guess the difference between a good and bad editor, how to spot good and bad practices, and what should you do as a young journalist in that kind of situation, but then also managing expectations. And I've had this a similar kind of experience already, and that's if you've got an original idea and you want to push that forward, what's the kind of situation, and how do you do that, bearing in mind that you're possibly a freelancer who has other responsibilities that take priority? Yeah, let's go with those for now.
All right. Okay. The good bad editor, good bad employer, and good bad company. If one is being offered a post, you want to know why you're being offered a post. If it's because somebody has left, where have they gone? Have they gone on to a better job? Have they left that job because they hate the place? They find it's something that they don't get on with the people. Do they find it unsatisfying? Do they find it wasn't what they expected? It's always good to know why people are leaving, if it's because somebody's left. And if it's often it's because they've gone on, advanced, or have gone to different elements. But that's a way of finding, if you're about to join a company that might not be all that it is said to be, or the position is not what it's said to be. I know that's a bit of investigative journalism in itself, but it's something that's definitely worth finding out from there. A good employer, bad employer, or editor. The good editor will know their staff, even if it's one person or 20 people. They will know their staff. They will know the strengths of their staff. They will know the creativity of their individuals. And if somebody comes with ideas, and if the worst thing is if somebody comes with an idea, rather than tells, you put forward the proposal in a proper way. It depends on the nature of the operation, but it might be, it's worth putting forward a rounded, unless you've got a news break, and if you've got a news break, then that's the story. But if it's a project, a feature, an investigation, or a creative idea, then it's worth doing it as a rounded way, and probably doing it as an email, and so it's actually doing it. So even though you're saying it verbally, you do email at the same time. So you've got your marker down, because it's not beyond realms that somebody might steal your idea, or might claim your idea. And if you put it in an email, you're down there. You've got it in there. It's a way of putting a marker in. So then that person might, the editor or the employer, might be an opportunist, and it's one way you can find out if they are. A good employer, all those things. Most, or an editor, because the editor may not be the employer, they may be a line manager in effect, and it's whatever role you're in. They should be keen for you to enjoy, get satisfaction. Because if the person, if you yourself are not satisfied, then you won't be as productive or creative as if you are. It's difficult, and some people that I've worked with and have worked for me, they're not nice people in the humane sense, but they're very good at their jobs. And some editors are known not to be warm, considerate, compassionate individuals, but they're brilliant at their jobs, and they shine and succeed. It's difficult to condemn them. I've worked with a number of editors at the Standard, and one person was a mate came to join the Standard from a Sunday national newspaper, and I found it really difficult working with this person because they came in with a different mindset, and I found it really difficult. And I spent 2 years thinking that they weren't really they weren't right, and we didn't get along. But then after the next 2 years, found it clicked, and I respected things that I saw, things that maybe I wasn't seeing because they were different from the way I thought in doing things. And in the end, the person was editor for 4 years, and in the end, I thought it was one of the most creative people there. So you do change your mind when you work with people. So it's difficult to make shouldn't make a first impression.
Brilliant, thank you, Doug. I realised we've mentioned a lot about editorial practice and kind of working with editors, freelancing, without really delving into the journalism itself. And I think, you yourself, Doug, have probably worked on hundreds of news stories, right? So I wonder if you can tell me about maybe what were some of the highlights and what stands out as a truly original and striking and brilliant piece of journalism?
There are probably not one single answer to that, because there are so many amazing pieces of totally different journalism. Our campaigns editor at the Standard and investigations editor, David Cohen. David, who's worked with the Standard now for probably 15 years, and also the Independent. Even David is somebody who will come up with an area of ideas and then put them forward, and that's often some brilliant journalism, because his thoughts have been varied from the very beginnings, which was a campaign called The Dispossessed, which was about people in London who were socially caught between the state and individual families, and it were people that didn't have a family or a house or a home, and they weren't necessarily on the street vagrants, but they were just lost between all the states. Now that started, and he saw that as an opportunity. And it was sometimes a mother with 4 children and no support, and the children had nothing at all. And in the same campaign, it was somebody who was a carer for their mother who'd had dementia, and the carer was aged about 13. And now David, actually, that's brilliant journalism, because he then could see and write this, and he had the writing ability as well. And that's a rounded brilliance. And so then you've got somebody who has a news who gets news exclusives, and Robert Jobson is a royal correspondent, and Robert Jobson gets exclusives, and he got the exclusive that Charles was going to marry Camilla, and that now you think, yeah, but at the time that was a huge world exclusive, and he got that from his contacts. Simple as that. He's probably 20 years of building contacts, and you can get contacts and that's exclusive. Then you have writers, pure writers, like Brian Sewell was an art critic, and Brian Sewell was wonderful. His writing, and he was just a wonderful writer, brilliant art reviewer, critic, and who was fearsome, and he would close galleries, and people feared his writing, but he wrote it brilliantly and poetically. So they're all different elements of it. And I think that's from the stories, and then there's the whole thing where you can get political exclusives, and it's in the whole let's say that if we call it the Iraq situation, and you had political exclusives that changed and revealed the weapons of mass destruction, and then you get somebody who can get under the skin of that and write a political exclusive which will change the world, because they can reveal something that is can end Tony Blair's parliamentary career, and all these things are possible. So there have been cases of that. It's not a simple answer, but within those are the front people who are the front line and broadcasters. That we've heard in the last couple of months. You have unscrupulous broadcasters, and it shows the power of broadcasting, it can be in any different field, and technically you have wonderful film creators or wonderful stats, people who can get under the stats, and statisticians, and the digital opportunities are enormous, of whether it's on a blog based or is a visual artistic base. So it's all down to the individual, but until you get experience, until you start taking part, you won't know which particular avenue is good for you. You get satisfaction from you. It all is down to getting that experience.
Brilliant, thank you, Doug. I believe we have a question from Nimra.
Hi, Doug. Thank you so much for speaking with us today. So I finished my journalism training last year in digital journalism, and I now work in investigations for an NGO called Global Witness. And my question is around kind of going off the beaten track a bit in journalism and building up kind of more specific or niche skills in certain areas, like sending FOIs and data and computational journalism. How can you kind of use sort of experiences of kind of going off the track of being in a newsroom to then add to your experiences as a journalist kind of later in your career? Is it possible to kind of go back in a more sort of specialized role, or do you kind of have to start all over again as like a general reporter?
Yeah, good question. And the different ways again of doing this. Now, you may have come across the name of somebody called Heather Brooke, and Heather was she was originally from America, came to the UK for lots of years, and so she was had a traditional US journalistic training in a local newspaper in San Francisco or thereabouts, and but came here, and she didn't plug into mainstream journalism here at all, but she was fascinated by stats, and she picked up on what she thought was the inconsistencies within the Westminster, and she picked up on the information on and did expose the expenses scandal of the MPs, and she did it from a statistician's base and revealing the information and not writing it, and in the end it was the Telegraph who took it over and did the editorial side. So she did it on the information base, and she became accepted and known as a person now who got the information from the statistician's side of things. and changed the British government. And the people believed it was a part of the whole major change in government in the last 20 years. More recently, there's somebody who was an apprentice, and she actually was very bright, and she came to the Standard and brought with her a belief in working on getting information about women's violence, violence towards women, violence in the street, and did FOI material, and also with local groups. And she put together a sort of webinar, basically, and worked with the Press Association when she was splitting work between Press Association and Evening Standard. And she did a whole number of FOIs. Now, Heather was not a journalist. Avianca, the other person latest, she was not a qualified journalist because she was still doing an apprenticeship, but she used these stats, and that's a way of going through. And as you know, the Bureau of Investigation, they do statistician type work of investigations, including FOIs. So there's ways of doing it, but it needs to come to something. You can't just do FOIs and just get all the information. You need a way of an avenue to put it forward. And it could be as a freelancer. It could be somebody working with the Bureau of Investigation or working with the Guardian or the Telegraph. You need an avenue, and it doesn't have to be print at all. It probably won't be print, and it would be a combination. But it's yeah, FOIs are hugely important, and it's an area that has been shown to reveal some appalling situations, and then they get into the media to bring it to the public's notice.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Doug. One thing that I would like to ask as a question is, one thing that I've encountered, particularly working in the BBC, is that another kind of invaluable tool that you can bring, particularly as a young person, if you're getting into journalism, is knowing people, is simply being a person that comes from a certain background, comes from a certain place in the UK, is in touch with communities that perhaps aren't represented. And I suppose that kind of touches on the aims of the Aziz Foundation as well. You know, the kind of ethos for why the foundation does what it does. So I guess, how valuable are those kind of roots that we have as people who are a bit different, and you know, how much should we be relying on that to help us and propel us moving forward?
Yeah, good point, and absolutely, it's crucial on so many levels. One, if it's a knowledge that, or a insight that you have, then it's important to do it, because if the individual feels this is something that is the story that should be told, deserves to be told, or needs to be told because of inequality or human costs or whatever, then absolutely it's right to do it. And from a professional point of view, it's an asset. It's a strength. It's a something additional. It's an extra string to your bow. And I think that this is recognised throughout society. Forget media, it's recognized throughout society as a good thing. And purely in if we talk about the status of communications, and that's broadcasting or pure digital, then a platform, then it's good for that platform, it's good for that publisher. So there's a bit of self-interest in that as well, because it's actually becomes an important avenue of getting to the public, and as such that's important for platforms. So it's a win-win on every occasion, and if addressing a social injustice, then that's a even bigger win. So it's definitely an asset. And I sort of saying about Avianca, just do a web search on a Google search on Avianca Makoni, Makoni, and look at some of the pieces that Avianca has written, because she has done some of this stuff that you're suggesting. And that she's actually, through her background, through her knowledge, and she's been in sort of just through her work, not her work, her living experiences, and she managed to get some stories and some areas of deprivation, or really of individuals who have got situations of bad crime or involved in different things, and she got that and highlighted areas that did need a focus and needed, or the individuals wanted it highlighted to show that there's an inequality and an unfairness. So yeah, it's a good thing.
We have another question, I believe, from Maria, who can't raise her hand because she's host.
So just kind of off the back of something you mentioned earlier about that statistician who kind of like exposed the expense scandal, it's something that I guess people have been talking about quite a bit, especially with the government's failings on COVID and you know, various things that are coming to light, especially with Dominic Cummings kind of like sitting and talking for hours and exposing the inner workings of government. Do you think that there is a current crisis in journalism where, like, rather than do the job of, you know, it's a bit of a cliche, but holding truth to power, journalists are almost becoming this like uncritical mouthpiece for politicians? Or do you think this has just been the state of affairs since forever?
There's two parts to that question, and take the first one. Is the media becoming less critical? I don't know if it is, actually. I think the media can be critical and is critical, and the media, it varies because the media is a broad statement, and you know, and within the media there will be certain supportive companies who are supportive, and there'll be other companies who are deliberately, because their party politics, will be against politics. So I don't know whether it is as kowtowing as might be suggested. I don't think it is. Maybe it's not as brutal as it had been in the past. In some ways, maybe the mainstream media isn't, but the social media is possibly more brutal and possibly more unfair in some elements, and inaccurate and untrue, and some social media platforms, you know, allow brutal untruth, and so there's a mix in there. And I think there is a difficulty in being seen to be negative, and I think if with the COVID, if a mainstream publication is just absolutely negative, I think it feels it may lose its readership, because you know, you can only put up with so much negativity, and so I think there is that danger. But I don't think it's the media per se kowtows, and there is no one thing in the media. It's a whole raft of different elements, and the worry would be if major media platforms were if they were divisive, and you had divisive media platforms, and there was they were such that they were poles apart, and that the half of the population, well, a third of the population were only listening to one argument, a third only listening to another argument, and a third only listening to one argument. And this is what has been said, of course, about social media, that if you only listen to your friends, you won't get a balanced view. And if it's only the Daily Mail readers, if they only read the Daily Mail, and the on-mail online readers don't go to anything else, and if those on Twitter and Reddit only listen to what their friends say, you know, that's how you just hope that there is a broad spectrum of views, that people do listen to more than one view. But I don't think it's very right to say that the media isn't as investigative as it has. It's always been, and I think it still is broadly doing that.
Brilliant. We'll take this last question from Usman. You're on mute, I think.
Sorry about that. Hey Doug, evening. Thanks for your time today. A bit of a two-part question. So I'm just building on something that you mentioned earlier. Sorry if it was asked earlier. I joined late, meeting at work overran a little bit. But you mentioned the effects of COVID on on working in the offices. So I just wanted to ask. COVID obviously changed the way lots of industries recruit, lots of industries work, and will be working going forward. Do you think that there will be a transition towards a greater degree of freelancing and independent investigative journalism, as opposed to large organizations, slightly independent? And if so, for somebody who's not who chose not to pursue journalism, having dabbled in a little bit at university, do you think that if that does happen, do you think that for slightly older people or people further down their career, do you think it'll be harder or more difficult for them to transition into a career?
I think it's always been difficult for people to change or into media. It's always been difficult. It doesn't mean that it doesn't happen, because it does, and it may well be that there is it makes it slightly easier, because I think the structures are changing. There's undoubtedly there's a change in the structure. It's not just COVID. The platform technologies have changed the structure. You no longer have 500 journalists on one physical floor working to departments and editors. It doesn't happen. It won't, and it did not very long ago, but it won't happen again. So if there is a structure within an organization or an individual, from an individual access from somebody, and you can do it through getting the attention of the publisher by just approaching them, or you can self-publicize. You can actually do your own blog, and some of this gets spotted, and can be self-made. And some individuals find that they can create it because by word of mouth it gathers pace far quickly, as we know, whether it's through Twitter or through just word of mouth and Reddit. It happens. So there's more chance, but the biggest difficulty is earning money. That if you're doing it and you need to get money for it, that's the hardest part, because you can get a huge number of readers, huge number of followers yourself, but unless you're sponsored, you're not going to get money. And it could be advertising, could be a promotion, or whereas if it's through a platform, they've got a structure to bring money in. So there's entry points, and it's not easy. But if there's brilliance or great ideas, there's no monopoly on those, and good editors will recognise it. So and changing career happens, but it always has happened, but it's difficult.
All right, we have gone over time just ever so slightly, but before we do conclude, Doug, would you like to make some final kind of remarks, any last comments before we end?
Only that I think the fact that you guys here are interested is terrific, because it shows that there is an enthusiasm and a drive of great, intelligent, creative people who want to prolong the strength of the media and build the strength of the media and society. You know, and the society isn't great. It's not always great, and never has been. It needs fresh blood. It needs fresh ideas, fresh views. Always has done, and now is no exception. So, and definitely stamina, creativity, and drive are the key things, and just seizing any opportunity that you can get. You're doing that already, so you're halfway there, and wish you well, and it will happen. You know, if you don't take the first knock, and then not that I think you will, but that's the main thing. Don't take the first knock. Many people have changes, and they go back and move slightly. So keep at it. That's what I'd say.
Doug, Wills, thank you very much, and thank you everyone else for joining. I think that concludes today's talk. Maria, did you have anything else to add before we finish properly?
Nothing else except thank you so much, Doug, for giving us your time and giving us your wisdom. I'm sure everyone here is deeply appreciative to hear from someone who's been in the industry so long and just is like absolutely knows the ins and outs. And I'm sure we'll all take the insight from this session and hopefully apply it to our careers, whether we're pivoting into journalism from another career, or just starting out as trainees, or doing courses like Mustakim. So thank you all so much as well for attending. I have been taking notes as Doug was talking, so we get to keep these nuggets of wisdom indefinitely, I'd hope, and there will be a recording available soon online. Thank you again, Doug, and I think we'll just wrap it up here, and we'll let you get on with the rest of your evening.
Okay, well, thank you very